Hey everyone, this is Pastor Andrew, and today we are going to be going over Psalm 15. So like the last few Psalms, this is going to be a Psalm of David. And one of the main themes that we are going to see here is the phrase, who is worthy? So a lot of what this Psalm is about is, who is worthy to stand before God and who has the righteousness that God has. And of all the things that we try to do, what can we do to measure up to God? And so a lot of what we're going to be seeing in Psalm 15 is, and what David is going to be telling us here, is about, who is worthy and how people can stand in the presence of God. So just take about like 5-10 minutes to go over this maps document. I wanted to read the passage for you pretty quick. It's only 5 verses, so there's 5 verses, and the maps document should be below. And so I'm going to read it, and then I want you to pause and take 5 minutes to look at this maps document. So starting verse 1, a psalm of David. Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right, and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue, and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money at interest, and does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. So yeah, take 5-10 minutes to look at these verses and come back in just a bit. Okay, I'm glad you did that. I hope that you are getting a lot out of just finding and looking into the text for yourself. So for me, when I looked and thought about the main point of the passage, the main point that I saw is that no one is worthy to dwell with God. So aside from Jesus Christ, one of the things that we see here is, no one is worthy to dwell with God. And one verse I thought would be cool for me to memorize is just the first one. It says, who shall dwell on your holy hill? Verse 1. Who shall dwell on your holy hill? And it just sets up this great idea and this great thought of, okay, like what do you need to be perfect? So looking at this, apply how this passage transforms the way we think, desire, and act. I think the way I think is just, I think I'm, not worthy. I'm not worthy to stand in God's presence. I think the way that I think, I realize, wow, I'm not worthy to stand in God's presence. The way I desire is, I'm not pure. I understand that. Looking at all of these standards that God has, I'm not pure. I'm not good enough to live up to God's standard by myself. And then act is, I can't earn heaven. So one of the things that I see here is, I can't earn heaven. I can't do enough to merit heaven and merit getting into the presence of God just by my own actions. Looking at pray, a way we can, what does this passage lead us to do? For me, it led me to repent and just say, forgive me, God, and wash me. I more and more every day, I always strive to be like God, and always try to look after and walk like Christ and like God. And even though I fail at this every day, that's what you do if you sin. You fail, and then you ask God to forgive you and wash your hands of what's happened. And I think a great way that you could share this passage is just take the verse you memorized. For me, it was verse 1, and you could just share that with someone. Like if you memorize verse 1, you could say, "Hey, who shall dwell on God's holy hill?" And you could talk about it with someone, or you could go to he who does not slander with his tongue, or does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend. You could talk about those things. And so I feel like this passage is a great, what would be called a conversation starter. So it can help people understand better everything that's going on and help people understand just more about who God is. So let's get into the text. And just as we're getting in, have you ever been in the presence of someone who you knew was just flat out just like it was just incredible when you met him? Like for me, when I met Shaquille O'Neal, this dude, I was in the presence of someone who I was like, man, if I played basketball against this dude, I would lose. Like, so Shaquille O'Neal is 7'3", and Jimmy Fallon over here is 6 foot. So Shaquille O'Neal, like Jimmy Fallon's not a short dude. Like he's a normal size looking dude, and then Shaquille O'Neal over here looks massive. Like I think right now he's like 330 pounds, maybe even more. Maybe it's like 350 pounds. And then you got little Jimmy Fallon over here, who's just tiny, and you got Shaq over here. And I remember the first time that I ever met Shaq. I think this was the only time I ever met him. It was in 2006, and at the time he was playing on the Miami Heat, and he was the highest paid player in the entire NBA. He was paid a ton. And I remember, I think at that time I must have been like 13 or 12. So here's like, if he's here, like here's probably like little, 5'2" Andrew. And I remember looking up to Shaq, and I was just like, this dude is massive. And not only that, but I remember looking at that and thinking about it, and it was just like, man, if I ever play this guy in basketball, like, I know I'd lose. Like I would have no chance. And see, it's like just being in his presence, it was a little bit intimidating just to be like, wow, like I wanted to talk to him, but I was too afraid because he was so big, and he's a nice guy, but it was just one of those things of like, he was in a store to help promote a product that he was selling. I think he was getting a shoe into Walmart, so he came to the Bentonville Walmart. But still, it was just one of those things of, I was just awestruck at how large he was. And when we look at this passage, the first thing that we're going to see after we see the Psalm of David, or again, remember, this is in the Hebrew, so this is part of the text, it's the Psalm of David. We see in verse 1, it says, who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right, and speaks truth in his heart. Someone again who, so they do not slander with his tongue, and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friends. So looking at verse 1, it says, who shall dwell on your holy hill? So this is just a question that he's asking, and he's asking, who shall dwell on God's holy hill? Who's worthy of God? And one of the things that we see in Romans 3:23, and I mentioned this before, but it's all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so when we look at this passage and it says, who shall dwell on your holy hill? One of the things that we know, and people in the Old Testament knew this too, it takes a lot to be considered holy in God's eyes. It really takes a lot. And this passage shows us. Verse 2, it says, he who walks blamelessly and does what is right. Now, on the outset, this may seem not like a huge deal, but think about this. So walking blamelessly means that in all that you do, not some, but all that you do, you don't make somebody mad for a reason, like for unjust reasons. Like you don't get angry out of nowhere about somebody. You never cheat anybody. Like you never try to make, like I don't know about you guys, Pokemon cards were super big when I was younger, and so like I remember one time like one of my neighbors tried to sell me or try to trade with me Pokemon cards. And so like I had a Zapdos, which is like a super good card. And then he had like, I think it was like a Charmander. And so that wasn't a very good card. And then he convinced me that if he gave me 3 Charmanders, it would be worth my Zapdos. And I remember I did the trade, went home, found out that I'd been cheated. And I got super mad and super sad because like he cheated me out of my cards. And I remember I was so mad about it, but then a few years later, I actually did the exact same thing to somebody else. So like, not only was I the victim in that sense, but I also did that as well to somebody else. Just like, again, like this is when I was a kid, but still it was like, I could tell then. I could tell when he cheated me that, wow, he's not very righteous. That he's kind of a jerk. And then I could tell when I cheated somebody else. Then I figured out about it. I felt bad. It was like, oh man, I did the exact same thing. And then does what is right. So this is kind of the same thing. So it's talking about, okay, you don't cheat anybody, you don't steal from anybody. It's going to go on to talk about like the mind, but this is talking a lot about actions. So, you always show up on time to things that you want to go to. So, you're trying to hang out with a friend, you show up on time to hang out with your friend. You're going to school, you show up on time to go into school. You always do what is right. And then also, this is talking about the mouth. It says, speaks truth in his heart. So as we've seen before, the heart is the center of the being. So the heart is the core of a person. So when David's talking about the heart, he's really talking about like the center of the emotions, really like where your deepest thoughts go on. So when you speak truth in his heart, sometimes, like, I don't know if you've ever been in this situation, but let's say like, okay, you're in a situation and like I remember, like I used to get tardy slips at school sometimes because I'd show up late to class. And I remember one time I got 4 of them, so I had to go late to lunch or something like that. And so on the outside, I remember when I got to the office, they said, are you sorry for being late? And I said, yes, I'm sorry for being late. But I don't think looking back, I was really speaking the truth from my heart. I was speaking the truth because I knew if I said, well, I'm not sorry that I was late, they would have just kept me later. So I just said, okay, sorry for being late. And then I got to go. So speaking the truth from the heart is not just saying the right things, but actually having the right intention behind it. Like, it's one thing to say, I really love God, but it's another thing to actually put God first in your life. So it's one thing to say, man, like, God always comes first. But then it's another thing to say, you know what? I can't go out this weekend because I really wanted to take this weekend just to pray, get alone with God, and spend time with my family. Like, that's a whole different thing. Looking at verse 3, it's again talking about this righteous person. It says, he who does not slander with his tongue. So in this, you don't say anything that is evil to someone. And then, he does no evil to his neighbor. So in this sense, he's always kind to his neighbor. He's always loving to his neighbor. And love in this sense has 2 aspects. Love is a good balance between truth and, care. So truth, in the one sense, it's talking about if someone is like, and I've said this before, but if somebody smells bad, okay, so if somebody smells bad, the truthful thing is to tell them they're smelling bad. But if you do it without any care, you're just going to say, dude, you stink, and then walk away, and they're going to feel really bad. But if your friend comes in, they say, and they smell bad, and you say, and you really care about them, but you don't want to tell them the truth, you could say, oh, dude, you smell great. And then they go to their first class and realize, wow, they smell terrible. But when you add both of them together, truth and care together, what happens is you have someone who smells bad, and you're like, all right, dude, like, I got some deodorant in my locker, or I got some deodorant in my backpack. Like, here you go. You stink. And so you give something like that to them. And then the last part of this verse 3, it says, nor takes up a reproach against his neighbor. So reproach is, in this sense, it's talking about, so let's look at the context. So it says, nor takes up a reproach against his friend. So this is something like, hold a grudge, or I guess you could, maybe take your neighbor to court for something they did wrong to you. So when it takes up a reproach against his friend, is basically you've got this friend, they love you, they care about you, and you're just gonna kind of blow them off. You don't care about them. Like for us, it could be like, you got a friend who really wants to hang out with you, and you're just gonna blow them off because, I don't know, you don't really want to hang out with them that bad, and they seem like a good guy, but you don't really want to hang out. Taking up a reproach in this sense could be like that for us. Holding a grudge. I don't think we're going to be taking anybody to court, but like it's acting kind and charitable in all that you do. Because again, you can be kind and loving even in things that are harsh, but it has to be a balance between truth and love, just like Jesus did. And thinking about all this, it's talking about who is, the perfect man. And I found this photo of, I think, just like, the perfect man. And here he is, he's, this is from The Notebook, but it's just a dude with, he's just pizza. So this is from The Notebook. And it's just, it's just a man who's all pizza. I got a kick out of it. Hope you do. But the perfect man this one's talking about is a little bit different. So looking at verse 4, it says, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, and who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money and interest, and does not take a bribe against the innocent, and he who does these things shall never be moved. Looking at verse 4, it says, in whose eyes a vile person is despised. So what this is talking about is if someone is righteous, then they should be honored. But if someone is, in this sense, is evil, they should be despised. And that's what this verse is saying. But that might be a little bit confusing. So it says, okay, a righteous person in whose eyes a vile person is despised. What this is saying, is this saying to us that if someone is evil, we should hate them? Well, not necessarily. But what it's saying is, like, think about, okay, big example, but the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. He's a man who basically has taken a country, and it's not just him, but there's others, but he's a man in North Korea who basically has taken a country and he doesn't allow any Bibles to come in, basically doesn't allow religion to come in. His people are oppressed, they're hurting, they live in poverty, and it's a state that's just really, really terrible for the people who live there and who are born there. That is someone who rightly could be despised. They're doing something that's evil that's affecting a ton of people. One of the ways that you see this in a lot of media is just Hitler. Hitler is an easy one. Say, okay, just an evil person. Hitler, there you go. Was Hitler someone who should be despised? Well, I would say yes. Because, again, he did a bunch of horrible atrocities and caused the deaths of hundreds of, or just millions of Jewish and non-Jewish people. It's a terrible thing. But when it comes to your neighbor, a lot of the times our neighbor is probably not someone we should despise. It should be someone we care about. And even for those people that we despise, we can always pray for them. We can pray that God would change their heart. And even the person who is the most wicked person that you know, who is the most vile person that you know, can still come to an understanding of who Jesus Christ is, and they can realize what he means and how he changes their life. And again, looking at this righteous person, it's someone who honors those who fear the Lord. So this is someone who they see people who fear the Lord and they praise them and they honor them. And what does that mean? It means that if they see someone who loves God, they want to spend time with them. They see someone who's godly and they say, I want to spend more time with that person. Like, that guy has something that I don't have, and I want to spend time with him to find out who it is. Like, I enjoy being around that person. Like, good things happen when I'm around that person. When I see someone who fears the Lord and loves God, like, it makes me want not only to be more like them, but also makes me want to hang out with them. Someone who fears the Lord is someone who should be praised. And looking at the last part of this verse, it says, who swears to his own hurt and does not change. So when it says here, does not change, what it's talking about is, it's another word for this is immovable. Basically, and one of the things that I've seen throughout my life is, like, my opinion, and I want to stress this a lot is my opinion. That's not how you spell opinion. My opinion on different things has changed over the years. Like, for example, I think my view on the like the end times, the basically the book of Revelation, I've had a lot of different viewpoints on it since I got to college, because I took a class on Revelation in college that changed my perspective, and then I took a few more in seminary on it, and just like thinking of, okay, are we in the 1,000-year period, or are we not? Like that's changed for me a few times. And that's not really what this verse is talking about, like small things, but when it comes to like your view of Jesus and your view of who Christ is in your life, that's something that should not change. You can say, hey, you know, I've been here before, I'm going to stand on it again, and I can stand on the rock of who Christ is and not be moved. And when it says it swears to his own hurt, that's one that you should really like dig in for yourself. And like, we all know that we're hurt. We're hurt, and we're hurting by lots of different things in this world. So when we swears to our own hurt, basically it's not ignoring your own hurt. It's not ignoring that it happens, but saying, yeah, I do get hurt sometimes. It is hard sometimes, but Jesus Christ is good enough to persevere through this with me. And look at the last thing about this righteous person. It says, who does not put out his money at interest. So one of the practices in this time was basically if you were Jewish, okay? So if you were a Jewish person, sometimes you would want to lend out money. So if you were Jewish and you were trying to lend out money, if there was another Jewish person over here, you would lend your money with no interest. And interest, very simply, if you give someone $100 and you say, pay me back in a month at 5% interest, then at the end of the month, they're going to give you $105, which is a $5 profit. Okay, that's pretty simple. So if this dude has $100, he says, hey, I'll give you $100 and in a month, give me $100 back. And hopefully they will do that. But what sometimes would happen is if the Jews would loan to non-Jews, so in this sense, a non-Jew is a Gentile, and they would say, okay, I'm going to give you $100, but I want $105 back. So what would happen is they would want that $105 back, and they would give them the 100 and expect to get 105 back. Now, is this a proper understanding of the law? Well, in the technicality of the law, basically what the law was saying is for Jewish people, you can't give money to other Jewish people at interest. But what this was saying is like, hey, if somebody needs money, like you should be able to rightly to loan it out to others. And so basically what this was saying is like, sometimes people could get really rich at loaning money at interest, and sometimes they could do it in ways that was like really unfair. So instead of giving $100 for 5%, they would say, oh, I'll give you this $100, but I want 150 back. And so instead of a 5% interest, it's a 50% interest. And so that's something that could cripple somebody or could make somebody really, really poor. And so what this is saying is like, you're not loaning out money at interest in small amounts. You're loaning at like a 50% amount that's really, really bad. And you're basically being really evil with your money. And so the heart of law basically was like, hey, care for the people who are around you. And look at this next part. It goes along with it. It says, does not take a bribe against the innocent. So this is also looking back on money. So it's basically taking a bribe is what Judas did with Jesus. Judas said, I'm going to sell Jesus, like the information that's going to capture Jesus, for 30 pieces of gold, silver. Basically what that was in this time is he's basically selling Jesus for about $5,000 to $10,000. So he's selling Jesus for like the price of a used car, which is crazy to think about. But basically, he took a bribe, so he took money so that he gave away information and gave away someone who, in that sense, was innocent. And at the very last part, it says, "He who does these things shall never be moved." So when Judas sold Jesus, he took a bribe against someone who was completely innocent. The reason that Jesus was innocent was because in his entire life, the entire time that he lived, he never sinned, he never did anything that was wrong, and he walked blamelessly, righteously, and perfectly throughout his entire life. He spoke the truth from his heart always. He never slandered. He never did evil. He never took up reproach against his friends. His eyes always honored the righteous. And he never did anything that was wrong. Everything that Jesus did was absolutely perfect. And when he died an innocent man, and everyone around him who saw him die understood that. But yet, 3 days after an innocent man died, that same innocent man was raised to life by the power of God, and now sits at the right hand of God. And Jesus is one who shall never be moved. When Jesus comes back in the book of Revelation, Jesus is coming back to show people that they have a chance at salvation. All they have to do is accept him as Lord and Savior. You have to do two things. You have to repent of your sins, and you have to believe in the person of Jesus Christ with your whole heart. If you do those two things, Jesus will come into your life and he will save you from your sin. And when it says the person who does this shall never be moved, it's encouraging Christians that even though we are going to move in not only small matters, but sometimes in really big matters, like maybe at one point we didn't believe in Christ. Maybe now you do believe in Jesus Christ. And if you haven't, you right now have a chance to do that. So if you want to talk to me just about either being discipled, about being a Christian, about any of that, please reach out to me. I'd love to reach out hear from you guys. And I pray this is an encouragement to you, and I want to pray for you before you go. Lord, the prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. And I pray for whoever's watching that you would be showing them that Jesus Christ is the best thing in their life, that he is